Caseus, Jedi Redeemed. The following is a fan-written story set 1 year before the events of Star Wars: A New Hope. The following story is non-canon to any and all events in the Star Wars universe. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. The days darken as the galaxy inches ever closer to war. The Rebel Alliance struggles to recruit followers to aid in their fight against the Galactic Empire. But in the Outer Rim, a different struggle takes place. After being attacked and captured by enemies from his past, and tragically witnessing the death of his apprentice at their hands, Caseus Urshan now lives out his days in darkness and despair, a slave in the spice mines of the planet Kessel. The flame of hope inside his soul has gone out, and the once proud Jedi Knight has become a shell of the man he once was, his will to fight crushed beneath the weight of loss and the pain of failure. With no end to his suffering in sight, and his whereabouts unknown to his allies, Caseus must make his choice: spend the rest of his days in slavery and servitude, or rise from the darkness and seek out his destiny in a galaxy that has long since forgotten him. Chapter 1. Over the skies of Bakura, from the Star Destroyer above, an Imperial shuttle flew through the atmosphere and descended to the ruined palace below. Outside the palace, officers and stormtroopers were hard at work, rounding up the rioting citizens and putting them into restraints. Minister Tanbin's reign over Bakura had come to an unexpected and disappointing end, at least in the eyes of the Empire. The shuttle landed. Stepping off the ramp, a decorated Imperial officer with gray hair and a gaunt face. Calmly, he stepped forward towards the saluting stormtroopers. "Governor Tarkin, perhaps one of you would care to tell me exactly what happened here?" "There was an insurrection, sir. The citizens stormed the palace and—" "I can see that, soldier. What caused this insurrection?" "We're not certain at the moment. TK-2850 and myself were stationed in the business district when it went down." "I see. And where is Minister Tanbin now?" "Dead, sir." "Really? Pity." Tarkin stepped forward, looking upon the damaged and defaced walls of the palace. "This was not solely the work of rebellious citizens." "It wasn't. From what we've been able to piece together, the citizens were aided by a Jedi." "A Jedi? Well, that's hardly my area of expertise." From behind the stoic Grand Moff, stepping off the shuttle ramp, Darth Vader approached. The stormtroopers stood at attention. "Lord Vader!" Vader paid no heed to the soldiers as he continued forward into the palace, looking around at the numerous bodies of palace guards and stormtroopers littering the ground. "Lord Vader!" Vader turned as a stormtrooper commander approached, escorting a man in a dark green outfit and apron, shaking with fear upon seeing this horrifying figure.
"Report."
"This man worked here in the palace. He claims to know the name of the one responsible."
Yes, I do. I'm Galric. I worked in the winery."
"I have no interest in your aimless ramblings. The Jedi. Who are they?" Grand Shadow! Grand Shadow! Achuba Shags Nagatani Chu! Grand Shadow! Grand Shadow!
Thick clouds of smog filled the air of Kessel, as slaves from all across the galaxy hauled crates and containers of spice towards large shipping freights. Escape. So close. So unattainable. Escape was impossible here. Kessel was not a prison. It was a death sentence. The slave master looked over his broken workers, whip in hand, staring with great displeasure at what he saw as slacking workers. His eyes narrowed as he pushed past two slaves, knocking them to the dirt, and stepped over to a weary man pushing a crate.
Grand Shadow! Grand Shadow!
The tired slave looked to his master in fear, as his face was harshly smacked with the whip, leaving a deep gash across his already scarred and worn face. Dropping to his knees, he found he had not the strength to stand. This displeased the slave master even more, as he whipped his back and sides again, and again, and again. The slave trembled and shook with every impact, feeling a stream of warm blood flow down his back.
Grand Shadow! Grand Shadow!
The thrashing continued, as the slave clenched his cybernetic fist in pain, before he was hauled to his feet and forced to keep pushing. His blue eyes flowing with tears of agony. But he made no outcry. He couldn't. He wasn't allowed to. Hours and hours passed before he was shackled and dragged off to his cell. A special cell. Little more than a dark hole. Isolated and cold. His cell door was closed, and he fell to the floor. He would remain here until the day began anew. A far cry from the life he once had. As he looked up through the cell bars above him, he shut his eyes. Caseus, once a Jedi Knight of the Republic, now reduced to something less than human. 3.5 years, Caseus had been living in this hell, this waking nightmare, forced to slave away for the fortune of others. He had nothing. He was nothing. What little sleep he received was plagued with nothing but the haunting image that tortured his soul. Liara. Her terrified expression before she died. Thinking about her was all that kept him from embracing death. And yet it tortured him. He failed. He couldn't save her. The bright light at the center of his universe had long been snuffed out. And there was nothing he could do about it. He had to live with it, until the day would eventually come where his body gave out, and he perished in the dark of Kessel, forgotten, alone. Little more than a memory that would fade to time and space. Every so often, thoughts would creep into his head, entertaining the idea of escape. But it was futile. He had long since submitted to his fate. Even if someone knew he was out here, they wouldn't come. They couldn't. Kessel was too well protected. You had more of a chance of finding a coin dropped into the middle of the ocean than you had of escaping. He'd come to accept that. They barely fed him enough to keep his strength up, to work in the mines. Fighting his way out was out of the question, and his will to try something like that had been shattered long ago.
Slave! On your feet!
Caseus did as he was told, and stood, his long brown hair matted to his face with sweat. Every inch of his body seared in pain, but it would be worse if he didn't obey orders. His cell door opened as an armed guard entered, grabbing his wrists and shackling them in front of him.
Now move!
Pulling the chain attached to his shackles, Caseus was led from his cell and through the caverns filled with slaves, still hard at work. Not a single one daring to make eye contact with Caseus or the guard. Caseus was hauled into a turbo lift by the guard and led to the quarters of Kavu Natesh, the head of mining operations in this sector of Kessel, and a member of the Pike Syndicate. Sitting behind a metal desk, he sat and stared at the broken Jedi brought before him.
I hear you have been falling behind in your work. I believe we've had this conversation before.
Caseus stared at the floor and stayed quiet.
Look at me.
The guard grabbed Caseus by his hair and pulled back painfully, forcing Caseus to look up at Kavu.
You should be a little more grateful, friend. When Dotami Fortuan brought you to me 4 years ago, he assured me that you would be a worthwhile investment.
Caseus stared and kept his mouth shut.
Nothing to say? Well, perhaps your services are no longer required. Shall I contact the Empire and let them know that we've discovered a Jedi in our midst?
Caseus' breath shortened. Kavu smiled as he saw the fear in his captive's eyes.
That's what I thought. As of today, your workload has been doubled, and your rations cut until further notice.
You've already...
Kavu looked carefully at Caseus and walked closer.
What did you say?
You already cut my rations. I can't work without food, and...
Kavu harshly smacked Caseus with the back of his hand.
You will work, or you will die. Don't forget, Jedi. You are mine.
Caseus shook and nodded.
Now, say thank you, Master.
Thank you, Master.
I can't hear you.
Thank you, Master.
Kavu smirked and returned to his desk.
Get this filth out of my sight and stick him back in his hole. And Jedi, I expect to see improvements in your performance. For your sake.
Caseus was taken back to the turbolift and dragged back to his cell, where the guard threw him to the floor and left, locking the cell door behind him. And there, Caseus lay, too exhausted to move. Slowly, he closed his eyes, preparing himself for another night full of torturous dreams. On Yavin 4, in the halls of the ancient Masasi temple, Gaidom stood, stroking his beard, staring at a projection of a map of the galaxy. Ever since Caseus and Liara had failed to report back, he had been searching all over for them. All over the Outer Rim, chasing vague phantoms and more dead ends than he could count. Years of searching. Years of nothing. And yet he wouldn't give up his search. A voice in his head told him that his friend wasn't dead. Not yet, at least. And until he was proven otherwise, he would continue to search. He owed it to him.
Gaidom?
A woman with brown skin and long black hair entered the chamber and stepped over to Gaidom, resting her hand on his shoulder.
You should rest. We have a briefing in the morning.
I'm fine. I have a few more systems in the Outer Rim I need to look into.
You've been in here all day. You really believe another 3 hours will get you any closer to finding him?
I can't rest yet, Sanja. Head to bed. Get some sleep. I'll be there soon.
That's what you said last week. I'm tired of not having my husband with me.
Gaidom looked into the eyes of his wife and rested his hand upon her cheek. I promise this time. Just give me another hour, and I'll be up. Sanja sighed and went to the door.
It wasn't your fault, Gaidom. What happened to them?
As his wife left the chamber, Gaidom continued to stare into the glowing map. Where are you, Caseus?